Time to continue our story. Story of Gulliver's Travels. Part 2, Chapter 1. Section 2. Okay. Let's continue. The farmer, by this time, was convinced I must be a rational creature. He spoke often to me, but the sound of his voice pierced my ears like that of a water mill. Yet his words were articulate enough. I answered as loud as I could in several languages, and he often laid his ear within 2 yards of me, but all in vain, for we were wholly unintelligible. To each other. Unintelligible. He then sent his servants to their work, and taking his handkerchief out of his pocket, he doubled and spread it on his left hand, which he placed flat on the ground with the palm upward, making me a sign to step into it, as I could easily do, for it was not above a foot in thickness. I thought it my part to obey, and for fear of falling, laid myself at full length upon the handkerchief, with the remainder of which he lapped me up to the head for further security, and in this manner carried me home to his house. There he called his wife, and showed me to her, but she screamed and ran back, as women in England do at the sight of a toad or a spider. However, when she had a while seen my behavior, and how well I observed the signs her husband made, she was soon reconciled, and by degrees grew extremely tender of me. It was about 12 at noon, and a servant brought in dinner. It was only one substantial dish of meat, fit for the plain condition of a husbandman, in a dish of about 24 feet diameter. The company were the farmer and his wife, 3 children, and an old grandmother. When they were sat down, the farmer placed me at some distance from him on the table, which was 30 feet high from the floor. I was in a terrible fright, and kept as far as I could from the edge, for fear of falling. The wife minced a bit of meat, then crumbled some bread on a trencher, and placed it before me. I made her a low bow, took out my knife and fork, and fell to eat, which gave them exceeding delight. The mistress sent her maid for a small dram cup, which held about 2 gallons, and filled it with drink. I took up the vessel with much difficulty in both hands, and in a most respectful manner drank to her ladyship's health, expressing the words as loud as I could in English, which made the company laugh so heartily that I was almost deafened with the noise. This liquor tasted like a small cider. This liquor tasted like a small cider and was not unpleasant. Then the master made me a sign to come to his trencher's side. But as I walked on the table, being in great surprise all the time, as the indulgent reader will easily conceive and excuse, I happened to stumble against a crust and fell flat on my face, but received no hurt. I got up immediately, and observing the good people to be in much concern, I took my hat, which I held under my arm out of good manners, and waving it over my head, made 3 huzzas, to show I had got no mischief by my fall, but advancing forward towards my master, as I shall henceforth call him, his youngest son, who sat next to me, and an arch boy of about 10 years old, took me up by the legs and held me so high in the air that I trembled every limb. But his father snatched me from him, and at the same time gave him such a box on the left ear as would have felled and at the same time gave him such a box on the left ear as would have felled an European troop of horse to the earth, ordering him to be taken from the table. But being afraid the boy might owe me a spite, and well remembering how mischievous, okay, I think it's pronounced mischievous, but just let's see.
Mischievous.
Yeah, it's mischievous.
Mischievous.
Mischievous. Okay, it's a very, very difficult word to pronounce. Mischievous. Evil boy. Or... yeah.
Mischievous.
Okay. Remembering how mischievous all children among us naturally are to sparrows, rabbits, young kitten, and puppy dogs, I fell on my knees and, pointing to the boy, made my master to understand, as well as I could, that I desired his son might be pardoned.
Mischievous.
The father complied, and the lad took his seat again, whereupon I went to him and kissed his hand, which my master took and made him stroke me gently with it. In the midst of dinner, my mistress' favorite cat leaped into her lap. I heard a noise behind me like that of a dozen stocking weavers at work. And turning my head, I found it proceeded from the purring of that animal, who seemed to be 3 times larger than an ox, as I computed by the view of her head and one of her paws, while her mistress was feeding and stroking her. The fierceness of this creature's countenance altogether discomposed me, though I stood at the farther end of the table, above 50 feet off, and although my mistress held her fast for fear she might give a spring and seize me in her talons, but it happened there was no danger, for the cat took not the least notice of me when my master placed me within 3 yards of her, and as I have been always told, and found true by experience in my travels, that flying or discovering fear before a fierce animal is a certain way to make it pursue or attack you. So I resolved, in this dangerous juncture, to show no manner of concern. I walked with intrepidity, okay, that's an interesting word. Let's see what it means. Intrepidity.
Intrepidity.
Intrepidity. Okay, it means bravery. Intrepidity, it means bravery. I walked with intrepidity 5 or 6 times before the very head of the cat, and came within half a yard of her, whereupon she drew herself back, as if she were more afraid of me. I had less apprehension concerning the dogs, whereof 3 or 4 came into the room, as it is usual in farmers' houses, one of which was mastiff, equal in bulk to 4 elephants, and another a greyhound, somewhat taller than the mastiff, but not so large. When dinner was almost done, the nurse came in with a child of a year old in her arms, who immediately spied me and began a squeal that you might have heard from London Bridge to Chelsea, after the usual oratory of infants, to get me for plaything. To get me for a plaything, the mother, out of pure indulgence, took me up and put me towards the child, who presently seized me by the middle and got my head into his mouth, where I roared so loud that the urchin was frightened and let me drop, and I should infallibly have broke my neck if the mother had not held her apron. If the mother had not held her apron under me. The nurse, to quiet her babe, made use of the rattle, which was a kind of hollow vessel filled with great stones, and fastened by a cable to the child's waist. But all in vain, so that she was forced to apply the last remedy by giving it suck. Okay. I must confess, no object ever disgusted me so much as the sight of her monstrous breast, which I cannot tell what to compare with, so as to give the curious reader an idea of its bulk, shape, and color. It stood prominent 6 feet, and could not be less than 16 in circumference. The nipple was about half the bigness of my head, and the hue, both of that and the dug, so varied with spots, pimples, and freckles that nothing could appear more nauseous. For I had near sight of her, she sitting down the more conveniently to give suck, and I standing on the table. This made me reflect upon the fair skins of our English ladies, who appear so beautiful to us, only because they are of our own size, and their defects not to be seen but through a magnifying glass, where we find by experiment that the smoothest and whitest skins look rough and coarse and ill-colored. I remember when I was at Lilliput, the complexion of those diminutive people appeared to me the fairest in the world, and talking upon this subject with a person of learning there, who was an intimate friend of mine, he said that my face appeared much fairer and smoother when he looked on me from the ground than it did upon a nearer view, when I took him up in my hand and brought him close, which he confessed was at first a very shocking sight. He said he could discover great holes in my skin, that the stumps of my beard were 10 times stronger than the bristles of a boar, and my complexion made up of several colors altogether disagreeable. Although I must beg leave to say for myself that I am as fair as most of my sex and country. and very little sunburnt by all my travels. On the other side, discoursing of the ladies, discoursing of the ladies in that emperor's court, he used to tell me one had freckles, another too wide a mouth, a third too large a nose, nothing of which I was able to distinguish. I confess this reflection was obvious enough, which, however, I could not forbear, lest the reader might think those vast creatures were actually deformed, for I must do them the justice to say they are a commonly race of people, and particularly the features of my master's countenance, although he was but a farmer, when I beheld him, from the height of 60 feet, appeared very well proportioned. When dinner was done, my master went out to his labourers, and, as I could discover by his voice and gesture, gave his wife strict charge to take care of me. I was very much tired and disposed to sleep, which my mistress perceiving, she put me on her own bed, and covered me with a clean white handkerchief, but larger and coarser than the mainsail of a man of war. I slept about 2 hours, and dreamt I was at home with my wife and children, which aggravated my sorrows when I awaked and found myself alone in a vast room between 200 and 300 feet wide and above 200 high, laying in a bed 20 yards wide. My mistress was gone about her household affairs, and had looked me in. The bed was 8 yards from the floor. Some natural necessities required me to get down. I durst not presume to call, and if I had, it would have been in vain. With such a voice as mine, at so great a distance from the room where I lay to the kitchen where the family kept. While I was under these circumstances, 2 rats crept up the curtains and ran smelling backwards and forwards on the bed, on the bed. One of them came up almost to my face, whereupon I rose in a fright, and drew out my hanger to defend myself. These horrible animals had the boldness to attack me on both sides, and one of them held his 4 feet at my collar. But I had the good fortune to rip up his belly before he could do me any mischief. He fell down at my feet, and the other, seeing the fate of his comrade, made his escape, but not without one good wound on the back, which I gave him as he fled, and made the blood run trickling from him. After this exploit, I walked gently to and fro on the bed, to recover my breath and loss of spirits. These creatures were of the size of a large mastiff, but definitely more nimble and fierce, so that if I had taken off my belt before I went to sleep, I must have infallibly been torn to pieces and devoured. I measured the tail of the dead rat, and found it to be 2 yards long, wanting an inch, but it went against my stomach to drag the carcass of the bed, where it lay still bleeding. I observed it had yet some life, but with a strong slash across the neck I thoroughly dispatched it. Soon after my mistress came into the room, who seeing me all bloody, ran and took me up in her hand. I pointed to the dead rat, smiling and making other signs to show I was not hurt. Whereat she was extremely rejoiced, calling the maid to take up the dead rat with pair of tongues, and threw it out of the window. Then she set me on the table, where I showed her my hanger all bloody, and wiping it on the lappet of my coat, returned it to the scabbard. I was pressed to do more than one thing which another could not do for me, and therefore endeavored to make my mistress understand that I desired to be set down on the floor, which after she had done, my bashfulness would not suffer me to express myself further. Okay, bashfulness. That's an interesting word. Let's see how it's pronounced. Bashfulness. Oh, it means being shy.
Bashfulness.
Bashfulness, okay. It's pronounced bashfulness, and it means being shy. My bashfulness would not suffer me to express myself farther. Then, by pointing to the door and bowing several times, the good woman, with much difficulty, at last perceived what I would be at, and taking me up again in her hand, walked into the garden, where she set me down. I went on one side about 200 yards, and beckoning to her not to look or to follow me, I hid myself between two leaves of sorrel, and there discharged the necessities of nature. I hope the gentle reader will excuse me for dwelling on these and the like particulars, which however insignificant they may appear to groveling, vulgar minds, yet will certainly help a philosopher to enlarge his thoughts and imagination, and apply them to the benefit of public as well as private life, which was my sole design in presenting this and other accounts of my travels to the world, wherein I have been chiefly studious of truth. That's an interesting word. It's out of study. It means studious.
Studious. Studious.
Spending a lot of time studying or reading.
Studious.
Okay. Wherein I have been chiefly studious of truth, without affecting any ornaments of learning or of style. But the whole scene of this voyage made so strong an impression on my mind, and is so deeply fixed in my memory, that in committing it to paper I did not omit one material circumstance. However, upon a strict review, I blotted out several passages of less moment, which were in my first copy, for fear of being censored, as tedious and trifling, whereof travellers are often, perhaps not without justice, accused. Okay, that will be it for today, and I will see you in the next one.